Pankaj, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. Like, welcome. I've been actually looking forward to this, like, really all day. So, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, no, I'm doing really good. Really looking forward to like this chat. Because you've been around in the industry for a good long time. Probably as long as I have. But it's like
Maybe
it's I
longer,
always
but
well,
who's
I always
counting?
love. Yeah. Well, yeah, I stopped counting a while ago. But I always love talking to like, folks like us, that have had this really long history in the industry because, the arc that we've lived through really prepares us for the arc that's coming, and so I think, we'll have a really good kind of chat, about that. But the way I wanted to start this is that I know a lot of folks know, who you are because of your, almost 14 or near 14 years over at Cisco. Um, but there might be others that don't. So let's kind of share like your career journey. I love that you started or you were back at Stratacom many, many years ago. That was actually when you were doing Stratacom, I was working at Digital Equipment Corporation.
Huh?
Um, and,
I
and
worked
so
at
we
DEC.
were actually, oh, you worked at DEC.
I worked at DEC back in early 80s.
Huh. I had no idea. So what did you do
Yes,
at DEC?
I was an ASIC designer. Now it's coming back in style. So
Yeah, sure enough. Yeah. And which group? Were you in Hudson? Were you East Coast
I
or West
was
Coast?
in I was in Marlboro,
In Wow.
but
Go figure.
we reported to the group in Hudson.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, that's where all the VAX, chipsets were being done, in
Exactly,
Hudson. Yeah.
exactly.
Oh, wow, that is so cool. I was in Littleton, so I was in
Uh-huh.
networking. I was always
Yes,
on the networking,
and I worked
side
with
of
the
the
groups
compute.
in Littleton as well as in Tewksbury in the networking
Yeah,
groups
that's right.
back then.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the two engineering groups, for sure. And oh my God, I forget Bill's last name, and John Adams, an ancestor from the John Adams,
Yes,
was running the group, and I forget Bill's last name. Oh, that's so terrible of me. Who was kind of like we actually had all of NAC networks and communications reporting up into him, at the time. But
absolutely.
so it was my time there that I got exposed to Stratacom because I was one thing I did when I was over at DEC is that we were looking at companies to invest in or to buy, and Stratacom clearly was on that list, and so there was an investment at some point in time. But I remember like doing the whole due diligence of like companies like Network Equipment Technologies. I think Timeplex at the time. Clearly, Stratacom was there. There was probably a host of different companies. So anyway, I didn't know you had the deck background. That's even kind of like a double benefit. In terms of like our intersection early on. But so
Absolutely.
once you pick me up from there, so from there, what have you done and where have you gone?
Yeah, so actually, my journey started prior to DEC, working at, you will remember the names. I worked at Prime, uh,
Yes.
and I worked on IBM mainframe plug compatible computing systems, which was a company precursor to EMC. So I started my journey in Boston back in '77. So
Yeah.
before I came into networking, I spent about 15 years in computer industry, including starting a company and selling it before I joined Stratacom. So a lot of
Wow.
lessons, and I thought in my after DAC, I joined Apollo Computer. So I pretty much covered the Boston computer companies in my
Yeah.
career there. And then I figured that, the computing was becoming rather too generic in terms of the price per MIP or megabyte or gigabyte. Actually, there was no gigabyte back then. So,
Yeah.
and I said, this is not fun. So that's when
Yeah.
I started to see the companies like CompuServe and AOL and others come in the picture, and I said, "Wow, this is something cool." And I started to hear about the terms like information superhighway and stuff. So I said, I need to
Yeah.
get out of computing. Little that I know, computing is coming back in style now. So, so
Yeah.
hey, what goes around comes around, right? So I joined Stratacom in early 90s, and you're right. DAC, Motorola, there were a bunch of companies who invested in
Mm.
Stratacom. I learned a lot actually about networking at Stratacom, and then Stratacom got acquired by Cisco back in
Yeah.
'96. So that's
Yeah.
how I came into Cisco. I was part of one of the edge routing business unit, and we were at that time back in '90s, we were pioneering a lot of voice technologies, voice over frame
Mm.
relay, voice over
Yeah.
ATM, and then finally voice over IP. And
Yeah.
when the internet was in style in late 90s, I left Cisco for a short time and joined a startup called Sierra
Mm.
Systems, which got acquired by Redback Networks in a very short time. And
Mm.
so I led engineering at both the companies before I came back to Cisco. I came back to
Yeah.
Cisco in early 2003, and I
Mm.
stayed all the way until when I retired in end of 16.
Yeah.
And as you know, I retired running all of engineering, marketing, and product management. So it was a pretty
Yeah.
large role
Yeah.
with of a group of about 29,000 plus engineers and marketeers driving about 38 out of $48 billion in revenue for the company
Mm.
at that time. And
Mm.
that's when I retired. And I think that was about coincidentally, there was also the time when John was also coming out of Cisco. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a fun journey. I mean, I won't trade for anything else.
Yeah. Well, it's like, well, it is. It's like, just an amazing kind of good, you know, East Coast, West Coast, kind of story. It's like on the East Coast, like you were in computing when computing was all on the East Coast. It's like Data General and Prime and Digital Equipment Corporation and IBM. Here and really before the PC revolution really kind of took off, or was yeah before it really took off. And then you probably got you were good, you saw, like, the writing on the wall. You moved over to the West Coast, and and then all of a sudden networking just burst out all over the place, and you were
Exactly.
instrumental in, like, in those transitions. Yeah, that's a great storied career. And what's really great about that is just the role that you had over at Cisco. Like, Cisco is like one of these great American companies, multinational companies, and you had a very large role in guiding that, along with John and a whole group of other, like, really talented people. It was a great trajectory, from literally kind of like the mid 1990s, really till to today, as well, with Chuck taking over it. So that was good. So then, what out of all of that arc, and that's like really a phenomenal, like, 3+ decade arc, did you see in the industry, whether it's an inflection point or a disruption that said, okay, networking is now it's now time to follow computing, and what Amazon did in the early 2007 2008 timeframe, and make
Yeah.
networking more of a service than build it, buy it, and build it.
Yeah. That's a great question, Nick. And now when I came out of the uh, big company that I was very proud of, and essentially it made me and who I am today. And actually, we learned a lot because you can imagine how many times one gets an opportunity to be part of a major industry wave. Back then, it was internet in '90s and 2000s, and uh, uh, what I saw coming out though was something actually John always used to bring up in my discussions with him, and he always used to tell me that focus on market transitions. He
Mm,
will say, keep the competition in your rearview mirror, and you don't want to lose sight of them, but focus on market transitions. And we both are products of the market transitions not captured, right? He was at IBM, at Wang Labs,
mm,
and
yeah.
I worked at Prime. I mean, I started on the IBM mainframes, and then at Prime, DAC, and Apollo. And as you can resonate with it, these companies missed some major market transitions, right? I
Mm,
mean,
oh yeah.
and
Mm,
we all know what happened to them, right? So I always kept that front and center into my thinking, and I thought about the transitions in three areas. Number one, when I came out of Cisco, I saw the transition um, in technology front, and the market front, and the and in terms of the consumption model front, in three areas.
mm,
um, on the market front, there was an emergence of cloud. Right by that time,
yeah.
AWS was taking a strong foothold. Azure was coming up, and I saw that there was a larger recognition and adoption of the IoT devices. Right, pretty much all over. And On the markets, on the technology side, there was early emergence of AI and softbots, and and then the last but not the least, it was about the market consumption story, and
Yeah.
something to be consumed as a service. So by the time I was starting Nile, I saw that and I said, people are adopting a bunch of SaaS companies, and they're consuming it as a service that they're readily and happily paying per month per user a
Mm,
motion. It's not people were dictating, and for years people were dictating that it has to be on the campus-wide license and it has to be perpetual, right? So I saw the transitions in the three dimensions, and I said, you know what, this is something that I need to focus on. Then when I looked at those market transitions, and then when I looked at the networking landscape, which has been around now for 4 decades. I mean, Cisco is 40-year-old company today,
yeah.
and and when I look at the age of the industry, and when I look at as to how capital and operations expense intensive the industry is,
Yeah.
I said, hey, something has to change. Something needs to change differently, and that's how the whole idea of Nile came into existence,
Mm.
really.
That's really interesting. So let me make sure, like I think I picked up everything. So clearly, kind of consumption model changing. So moving more towards kind of consuming things as services versus like capex. Obviously, cloud, transition was kind of leading in that consumption model change. And then we also had the advent of kind of a new technology around AI, and so it was kind of the confluence, of those three: is cloud, AI, and consumption model changing. And then I think, it's almost like sometimes, like you have the old story where like you have these fruit flies that are like maybe in like a transparent box, and they're always flying around in the box, and you pick the box up and they stay in that box, even though there isn't a barrier there. That's almost like how networking has been for 40 years, right? So it's you're totally right. It's a very capital intensive business or industry. And also it's a very operational burdensome business as well. There's so much toil that goes into maintaining and keeping kind of a large sprawling network up and running. So that's interesting. So it's really, I would almost like say there are kind of like four dimensions there too, and the status quo, shouldn't be allowed to stay where everything else is like fundamentally changed. Is that kind of
Absolutely.
like, you know,
I mean,
yeah,
John and I used to say this, by the way, back at the old place, that for every dollar that the customer spent on a gear, customers would end up in spending $3 to $5 on operations, right? So
Right.
the market that we are going after from the point of view of the hardware and the software cost is about give or take roughly about $25 billion a year, right?
Hmm.
So customers are spending $75, I mean $75 billion rather, on operations, and it gets spent on not just on IT operations and management tools, but there is a giant pool of certified professionals around the globe, partners and more, where the money gets end up in being spent, right? And
Yeah.
so it's a pretty heavy, like stodgy industry that it has been around for quite some time, right?
Yeah, yeah, really insightful. So yeah, it's good. Like really, every capex dollar, you better be ready to spend three times that, on the operational piece of that. Um, so I think that maybe kind of transitions us towards. I think we kind of identified the kind of inflections and the disruptions, and maybe the opportunity. So let's now talk a little bit about Niles. And so when you took all of those factors in, um, then what did you create with Niles to address those?
Yeah. So Nick, I actually saw the complexity sip in over the years, decades, I would say. And it truly got engineered into this industry, right? So I truly saw this as once in decades opportunity to create something disruptive. And I wasn't trying to disrupt something just for the heck of disruption, right? But I really wanted to
Mm,
create something which can resolve this insane level of complexity and deliver a simple and secure access to a highly reliable and a high performance networking. And that's
mm,
what we have done, right? For the first time in the industry. And by the way, when we were working on this, one of the pointer that I would hear from the customers over and over again was that, hey, look at what happened to the universe that you come from, which is compute and storage. I mean, that's what I worked on for the first
mm,
15 years of my life. And they said, look at what the public cloud providers have done to that industry, right? They provide you something on the fly when you want it, where you want it, and you pay for what you use. So
mm,
why this networking industry has not been able to do the same? So that was always front and center in my mind. So this is where at Nile, first time in the industry, what we are doing is when we look at the enterprise networking, we are flipping the old script. Honestly, we
mm,
are integrating the cloud native software delivery model just the way the software is developed at the cloud providers. That's exactly the model that we use.
mm.
That's why we have a unique advantage. I mean, when you look at all other companies, nobody is as young as we are, right? So
Yeah.
we have a unique advantage of being born in cloud and AI native, right? And so this is huge for us. We are clearly creating as a service consumption model, born with the first company to have the zero trust security. We provide the service level guarantees. And then, last but not the least, we are really weaving, and we'll touch base on this, AI networking into a pretty single and simple solution architectures with all these ingredients that we call the next generation enterprise network. And I want to actually emphasize that what we are focused on at Nile is on the campus wireless and wired networking as a service, right? That's what we are
Uh
doing.
huh. Yeah. So campus wired and wireless is the main focal point. Okay, that's all right.
Exactly.
So that's a really good kind of positioning that we have of knowledge. It's really kind of like the kind of the cloud model for networking. You know, it's a consumption based model, really focusing on campus. Some people call that carpeted facilities, I guess. You know, so it's like is that correct? Is that where you would also think?
Well, we have been. I'm sorry. Repeat that again, Nick. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, so some refer to this as carpeted, places that have carpets, like office
Yeah,
buildings and and campus
yeah,
environments,
yeah.
and
Absolutely. At the same time, what I would say is that we have done some venues, and we are in a process of doing the venues, which are outdoor venues too. So that's why I want
ah,
to make sure that we are. But you're right. Dominantly, the business is in the carpeted enterprises. Absolutely
yeah, okay, great, wired and wireless. Okay, that's all
correct.
right, super. All right, so I got it. So and in the process of doing that, do you all do you do? I'm sure you have to. You have to kind of do assessments, like like how much equipment actually goes in there. So it's like it's. I think the thing that's always been difficult with networking is that there still is hardware that's required. Where in compute, yeah, well, you have your own laptop, and your own machine, but that could be anything, and that's connecting you into a cloud. With networking, you do need some physical devices, there or wireless devices there. So I guess how do you go about in the sizing of that, and is that something that Niles deploys, and then once it's
Yeah.
deployed, it manages it, it takes it all over, and you really never think about it as a consumer.
Absolutely. So that's a great question, by the way. And so there are a couple of questions in your what you just faced. One is how do we size it all, and number two, the difference that you see in the networking industry compared to what you see in the computer storage. I would actually start with that point first and say uh, we see actually a lot of similarities between our model and what we see on the AWS, Azure, and the GCP, how they operate, which is
Hmm.
uh, what they have is they have the remote data centers
Right.
uh, providing the compute and storage on the fly when the user needs it. However, IT still is in charge of making sure that they can onboard the user onto the public cloud with the right policies, right security in
Right.
play. So, and by the way, same thing, offboarding them from the cloud onto the campus. Campus and their own data network internally, right? So, all of that. So there is a pretty important role that IT plays, even for the public cloud users. So in our case, you're right. The access points, access switches, distribution switches, controller for us. I mean, these are the assets that reside in the enterprise, and obviously our stack is residing in the cloud. But all those assets, by the way, that we call the Nile's way of AI networking, that is actually run pretty autonomously without a human touch after it is
Mm.
deployed. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
IT has the full visibility and control, but it's completely autonomous. So just the way the remote data centers are autonomous, we are similarly, our assets, they too run completely autonomously, right? This is where
Yeah.
the similarities between the cloud model of the compute and storage and what we do with networking is like. Now, how do we go about doing it and sizing it up? You're right. Networking is pretty complex, right, in many ways. So the way we do it is our journey starts with customer identifying a building or a floor. We would either send our trained professional, or we have trained a bunch of partners. We are a pretty partner centric company.
Mm.
So we have trained these partners, and they will go to the customer site and they will do the complete survey. We do a pretty
Mm.
high performance survey, of high definition survey, I should say, of the given site. Once that survey data is generated, we have developed a lot of automated tools. Then the human dependence starts to wane. And
Mm.
that data, by the way, will create the architecture for that given site automatically. There's no human
Um,
involved. It
mm.
will create from the architecture, it will create the build of material automatically. And then that build of material will be fired up at a factory in Far East. And then the gear will be delivered to the end customer. And then we have made both the deployment so insanely simple. We have followed actually a lot of principles of simplicity from Apple, literally. To like, for
Yeah.
example, when you and I buy iPhone, there is no manual, right? You basically bring
Thank
out the
God.
device from your box, power it up, sync it with your
Yeah.
old phone, bingo, here you go.
Yeah.
We provide a very simple mobile app on iPhone and Android that literally anybody can use to install the network very simply. I mean,
Mm.
installations are done literally at like a very, very high speed, and the networks are
Yeah.
brought up at an amazing speed. And once they are brought up, then the what we call day plus one, day two operations are completely automated, right? With
Yeah.
the full control and visibility of the IT. But in order to do this, Nick, we built a very different company, right? So this is
Yeah.
where, once again, Apple, they built their entire vertical stack, and people always, and I
Yeah.
always cite Steve Jobs' quote. He always used to say, simple is much harder than complex. You have to work
Yeah.
hard to get to simple. But once you do, you can move mountains, right? And the
Yeah.
reason why he used to build the entire stack himself is because he wanted to have control over as many knobs as he possibly
Yeah.
can. And we found that to be true in our case, that this is the reason why we have built our own hardware, our own firmware, our own software, our own app layer, and the APIs, and the entire cloud stack from scratch. This
Mm.
is the reason why it has taken us as long as it has taken us, right? Because,
Wow.
and once
Mm.
again, there are tons of innovations and lots of patents in AI and automation that we have generated as a result of that. But that's what it takes, because we are all about running it with uh, pretty much next to no human touch as much as we possibly can to
Yeah.
run these complex networks, right?
Wow. So a lot in there. So let me see if I can kind of like there's both supply chain, which I found fascinating, and there's also just the journey of like starting up. So you have a consumer, they want to engage. Either you guys send out your own folks or partners, they go out, they do the assessment, they scale it up, they basically size it up. That probably gets signed off. Once it gets signed off, that creates a job order that goes basically overseas where the equipment is assembled, the network is built, probably tested, and then it is shipped, and installed. And then once it's installed, then the IT group, they have controls, they have policy over it, and they can manage it um, at the higher level, not at kind of the net ops kind of level, but at a more higher level around onboarding people, policies, access, accepting, denying, all those things that are important around how do you want to control network and access to particular information. And then the day-to-day operations, once that is up and running, I think, since you have a vertically integrated stack, you've also probably started with AI at the very beginning of this so that configuration changes, like whenever someone's changing the policies and that requires a configuration change, that probably ripples through the infrastructure, and that infrastructure that adapts and changes based upon those particular policies. And so now they have a service, they have controls, and they don't have the burden of a large capex spend and the maintenance of that equipment and the worrying about upgrading it and what have you. Is that
Yeah.
is that kind of it?
Yeah,
Did
no,
I
no,
get that?
you got it right. And by the way, Nick, I mean, you and I, we both know this universe so well. This is a universe which is laden with so many architectures. I mean, like, if you
Yeah.
and I start to list them, there are probably over a dozen architectures just for the enterprise networks. There
Yeah.
are maybe dozen or 15 different protocols, each protocol having couple of hundred to maybe over 1,000 knobs. And then you got so many SKUs of each product from all the
Right.
incumbents. And then the software revision levels. When you multiply just what I just described,
Hmm.
that creates a snowflake all over the globe, right?
Yeah.
Every installation is unique and different. Customers struggle with the policy enforcement. There is a poor visibility and control. There are uncoordinated updates, and we all know as to how the uncoordinated or the botched software updates can do to you. um, uh, Security patches, PSERTs, how the
So much.
manual error prone management can do what you need to do, right? It's like when you look at it all, it is so hard and almost impossible to enable the closed loop automation, right? And
Hmm.
that really creates environment where the incumbents end up in providing a pretty reactive support, right? Troubleshooting, when something is running
Yeah.
fine, great. When it's not, when something breaks, you and I
Oh,
know we witnessed some recently as to what it can do, right? So, and I
sure
have gone through my
do.
fair share of outages. So, I
Especially
think
if you were flying on Delta. But go ahead. Sorry.
I mean,
Yeah.
so I think when you look at it all, these are the classic issues that you see. This is what we really were aiming for, right? And today, actually, I was hosting one of the large bank and financial service customers. We do this regularly as part of the customer feedback series, and we invite the whole company. And there were a couple of things that I mean, the presentation was just absolutely phenomenal, right? And now this is a bank and a financial services institution, so the things that matter the most to them, by the way, it will be no different in a healthcare institution, right?
Hmm.
Resiliency, right? He said service must be available all the time, cannot go down, period, right? He said, like, perseverance is the key. It better be always on. And what they look for and why Nile appealed to them was they were able to have something so simple and something which gets rid of all the complexity. And by the way, they were very impressed with the zero trust network security that we provide, which they found it to be so unique in the industry, right? So,
Hmm.
and then even when the problem occurs, ability to be able to pinpoint and resolve it very quickly is so critical, because problems will happen.
Hmm.
We know that, right? So I think those are, but our ability with what we have created to be able to provide something where problems are not going to occur, right? And it's going to be something new and different. So,
Yeah.
we took all of this to really zoom in into what we thought would be the new innovation foundation that we need to build, right? And the principles that we need to adapt. And this is the reason why, to us, it really called for how do we unify the network engineering with the true zero trust security at the campus level, and how traditionally the manual lifecycle managements are taking place. How do we bring it all into a single intelligent system designed for the full
Hmm.
stack integration and with the closed loop automation? And that's what we have built.
Yeah, it's like well, one quick thing on this. I do want to kind of move on because I have a couple other questions. But like one is the whole aspect of like zero trust. Like we've been struggling with that in the industry for like 10 years. You guys have. I'm not sure what you've done, with it to actually make it work. Like, One idea has been around just the concept around identity and expanding the definition of identity to include items and things and people and devices. And then the other is like AI's role in the control plane there to kind of assess real time kind of threats and especially real time threats, to assure like that connection that's been established during zero trust, is maintained and secure. That's really key. It's like if that is a part of what Nas is delivering, that's really fundamental and that's really key
It
because like with really zero trust, you don't have to microsegment. You can get away from all this segmentation stuff, and that's a massive toil and operational burden in and of itself, just on that one point. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of data points, and then I'll shed some light on how we have achieved this. Right. Uh, Look, we both know how the hackers are going to try to get any sensitive data. Uh,
Hmm.
you also can have the insider threat. It's not just external, right? It could be both, right? A lot of unauthorized access, phishing attacks, and more, right? And by the way, depending upon whose report you read, 50 to 70% of the attacks exploit the network vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah.
Things
Yeah.
like unpatched devices, a lot of misconfigurations, and more, right?
It's a big number.
Everybody has been talking about the zero trust, but how do you
Mm.
actually implement it, right?
Right.
So Gartner, by the way, says that 68% of the enterprise struggle with what they call the default deny, right? Which is, by the way, the basic principle of zero trust, right? So it all starts with the network architecture and the
Mm.
network infrastructure, I should say, right? You need a network that's going to be protecting itself both from internal as well as external threats.
Mm.
And in some sense, you got to think of it like as if it's a black box that nobody should be able to get in or be able to look inside, right? You want to
Yeah.
prevent that. So, one of the questions that we always, by the way, pose and we ask is with the customers is to say, you know, ask yourself, is your underlying network infrastructure secured day one? You will find in most
Mm.
cases it's not, right?
Yeah.
Number two, is the access to the network authorized and authenticated? You'll find that's not always the case. And then is the communication between the users and the devices protected once it's connected, right? And you will find that that's not the case either, right? So we the way we have done it is we absolutely make sure that every user and device is authenticated and authorized before they get on the network. Number one. Number two, we have continuous authentication because which is very critical to prevent the identity spoofing. You don't want to let that happen,
Mm.
period, right?
Yeah.
Also, something you said a minute ago, which is you also need to isolate every user and device. And by the way,
Mm.
give them the least privileges as possible and use microsegmentation to make sure that only the authorized traffic is allowed, and then you use the power of a lot of behavioral analytics, right? So we have done many things. Number one, we realized that in order to do this, you had to build this day one. You cannot have the mindset that
Mm.
you build a castle, then you build the moat, right? You need to
Yeah.
build it from you need to build it
Yeah.
from the foundation, like ground up. We have, for example, TPM in every piece of hardware that we make. We put the MACsec device in every single piece of hardware that we make. The entire traffic, data and communication traffic is completely encrypted in Nile service universe. Period.
Mm.
Nobody can look in it. But I mean, our employees cannot, partner cannot, even IT cannot. We encrypt
Mm.
all the data. We give the we believe in bring your own keys. So we give all the keys to the IT and to the customer to say these are your keys. If a problem happens and we need to take a look at the flow or something, we will actually ask them to decrypt a key or two so we can take a look at what's going
Wow.
on inside. we have been like maniacal. We do not, by the way, let Nick, we do not let by default any lateral traffic to flow, because we say this is where a lot of this, all this attacks where somebody goes to a public place and gets their laptop or a phone infected with the virus. They come and they propagate that laterally, right? And so
Yeah.
all these attacks, DDoS and others, we by default, we just don't allow that, right? Unless IT wants to make an exception for certain traffic type to move forward. We follow very strict access and identity management. We trust no one. We
Yeah.
actually we once again we authenticate and authorize everyone. We have gone through some cases where we are one of the customers who had a rogue access point for months and they didn't even know. And
Uh,
they when they deployed Nile, we were able to detect it like literally like in minutes, and we were able to contain it right away and notifying the customer to remove it immediately. We have been able to help our customers to get the cyber insurance if they were not able to, or to lower their premium, right? And we have also,
cool.
by the way, had a customer where or somebody was traveling, employee was traveling, came back to the office, and when that person came back to the office, the security system and the CISO side lit up with all the alarms, and that
Uh,
would cause a lot of worry, typically in an enterprise. But with Nile, they knew exactly what was going on, and we were able to stop the malware. A lot of people do not know how to stop the lateral malware. I mean, this is I'm
uh,
just giving you a pretty broad
oh,
swath of innovations that we have done to create this. We have, by the way, a very major bank that we are working with, and they're not unique. They're like a
yeah.
bunch of other financial institutions where they operate three separate networks, one for IT, one for OT, and one for the guest.
Yeah. Makes
we
sense.
even
Yeah.
we didn't even talk about the guest services. The way
Mm,
we have designed innovatively the guest services, that where it will never ever touch, any packet will ever touch the corporation, period, right? So this
makes
company,
sense.
by the way, this bank, for the first time, is entertaining the thought of combining all three into a single network. I mean, that's a
Huh.
when they do that, I mean, it will be a major proof
Yeah.
point for us to take it.
Oh, that would be. Yeah. And I don't think there's anything in regulation wise, that kind of like forces that separation. That's kind of just a best practice in the industry. So
Exactly.
yeah, if you can mitigate that, and in essence, like combine them, you get efficiency. Yeah. Well, now this is like really good. But I have one question.
Please.
And so we've been talking a lot about from an AI perspective. So Nile's deployment of AI and how that is delivering, a great service, a great NaaS service. So, but the way that we're seeing clearly AI, develop is not just like large language models, but also just like every major application that we're using, whether that is like social, whether that's like, office productivity services. AI is getting integrated into everything that we're doing, and that's also forcing actually network pattern changes. And there's this really interesting new dynamic around cloud edge and kind of AI traffic patterns, and your data center. So have you kind of noticed that, and have you been thinking that okay, well now Niles can be Niles can offer a new kind of wide area networking reimagined for how traffic patterns are changing and how latency requirements are changing based upon maybe where you are and where the application and where the data is at. So, have you kind of seen that, and are you kind of building, to that?
So a couple of actually, you pointed out a few things in your question, Nick. One is, in my opinion, and this is not anything unique. You hear this and see this from many people, is that it's clearly a giant game changer, right?
Mm.
Without a fail, especially when you combine it with the automation, right? And we by default, with the deployment and use of many very intelligent sensors that we have, that we deploy in the enterprise, we gather a tremendous insight and the data, which actually powers our AI automation, for what we need to do. And by the way, this is where, with lots of deployments now around the globe, that we have seen, we already are seeing the impact and the effects. And I'll come back to how what we see in terms of the patterns of the data and the latency and stuff, right? But
Mhm.
couple of examples I'll give you is that how it has impacted us, compared to the traditional networking vendors, is that, for example, in our, we are a true service provider. But for a true service provider like us, we are a small company, obviously. But for a service provider, there is no concept of a knock for us.
Right.
We have
Yeah.
none. Okay.
Mm.
Instead, what we have is the AI operation center, where majority, I mean, like 99.5 or more percent of the tickets are handled automatically. And then the balance of a fraction of a percent, like 0.5% or less, are supplemented with a tremendous amount of contextual data that we generate by
Mm.
AI, that our engineers can adapt. Think about it. Like, so, and I think this is a very important point to really bring out, which is where we are. This is the advantage that we have of being born in cloud and AI, versus what you hear in the industry is what I call AI washing or AI ops. That's
Mm.
different. This
Yeah.
is
Totally agree.
this is
Yeah.
the this is like your native birth in AI, which is actually, the analogy I give it is that, like, uh, uh, there's a big difference between a vehicle with uh, a cruise control versus a vehicle
Full service
which can be
drive.
driven autonomously.
Yeah.
Okay, the vehicle with the cruise control, you still need to apply brakes and you need to roll
Right.
down the windows yourself, right?
Mm.
Whereas when you are sitting in an autonomous vehicle, you push one button, you go. That's who we are. And that's
Yeah.
what the cruise control vehicles are, what the other AI networking companies are, right? Honestly. And
Good analogy.
it's a very different ball game. This is why we built it from scratch with all the principles I told you that we
Mm.
did it, right. And this is so important and critical. And by the way, what we are seeing is, as part of this, is that because of AI pretty much embedded everywhere, you are by default, you're going to generate a lot of data, a lot of latency. So
Yeah.
we know what is that we will end up in generating, and which means that it's an old school of compute and storage. Once again, you always need a lot of compute and storage to make sure that you can spend compute cycles to be able to not only manage the data, make use of it, do what you need to do in
Yeah.
timely manner, because it's all about, today we are dealing with all the real time traffic, voice and
Yeah.
video all over. We guarantee, by the way, Nick, that our enterprise customers can do a 4K video quality call from anywhere in the building, right? That
Yeah.
is the kind of latency and the performance, and always on, with the absolute security that we offer to the end customer. So when you offer that kind of a high fidelity service to the end customer, you have to be able to handle it, right? That's why we deliberately designed all the very high end enterprise class hardware. Like, our access point has three radios and a Bluetooth. I mean, who designs access point with four radios total, right? I mean, like,
Yeah.
and
Mm.
like, access switches and distribution switches, which are completely fully loaded with all the power that you would need to handle the latency and all kinds of data types that we will encounter.
Yeah. Well, I think that's pretty insightful. So, like, obviously, you're delivering a service, and so while all the traffic is encrypted, you are still seeing the patterns. You're still seeing where all the traffic is going, and also, like, you do see, latency, and you do see all of the statistics associated with all the network traffic. So, if anyone is really going to kind of see the changes that that networking traffic and the latency requirements associated with it are being influenced by AI. It would be you guys. So that's
Yeah,
actually really insightful, point.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I want to end with one question. And so you've been, in the industry for a while, Pangash. And so impact of AI, so not just on our industry, but in general, where do you think this arc is, that we are just really starting, right now? So what's your vision?
Um,
What changes? What's so
yeah. Look, we talked about, we dated our experience early in the conversation. So we both have seen the market transitions in compute. We saw the internet revolution, and when internet revolution came about in 90s and 2000s, I was like, oh wow, like, this is it, like, this is where it's going. And then
mm,
came mobility. Then came the
right?
age of iPhone and the universe of apps. And, like, I mean, oh my God, like, think about the apps like Uber and DoorDash and others that, what would we do without them, right? And we became so dependent. And then came cloud, and then it changed the paradigm completely, right? And it's like shifting this decades old uh, apps and data residing on mainframes and more onto the other universe. It will take time. It doesn't happen overnight. Change, as you
Mm,
and I know, doesn't happen overnight, which is what we are going to see with what we are doing too, right? Um, AI, when I look at all these four major transitions in the market, I have to say AI is by far the most impactful. It can
mm,
have an impact in every walk of life. Like, from, when we think about cloud has obviously a pretty great impact. But, like, I mean, when it came into the use, enterprise and enterprise related activities remain the dominant use case, right? But this one in particular, everything from consumer to business to you name it, any walk of life
mm,
is going to be impacted dramatically. And it's not just in one industry, it's going to be in our own industry, it's going to
mm,
be in financial services, it's going to be in healthcare, it's going to be in
mm.
entertainment. I mean, look, I mean, like, when the
Yeah.
writer's strike happened, so, last year, some time back, I mean, the one of the major concern, the writer said, well, hey, what the heck AI is going to do to me, right? So I think it's a
Yeah.
trend which is not going to go away. It's going to be impactful globally, and but I'm old enough to recognize that technology always has a very positive angle. And I am pretty
Yeah.
confident that there will be enough safeguards and the safety checks put in to make sure that, you know, people are not misusing it. Like, we are doing our part to make sure that what we do with the soft chatbots, how do we combine that to make sure things don't happen? I mean, I think you
Yeah.
will see that with all the major players where that doesn't happen. But I think in terms of changing the lives and changing the lives of my grandchildren and beyond, I think this is going to be having an incredible impact on our
Yeah.
lives every single day.
Yeah, I think we share the arc, and I'm always much more positive, around the impact of waves of technology than not, and they seem to be things that we can manage pretty effectively, as well, on the downside. But Pankaj, I think that's all the time we have. Actually, I think it's
Thank
a
you.
great place to end this, as well, with a really good vision of really how the industry will proceed. Thank you so much for taking the time, and being with me and talking with everyone as well. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
coming on the
Thank
show.
you, Nick. This was a wonderful session. I enjoyed a lot, and we were able to go down the memory lane through a lot of lot of industry transition points. So this is great. Thank you.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you. And thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye bye.
You too.